Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the newest episode of the What's Choppin' podcast, episode 3. My name is Alec Crouthamel. As always, I am your host for the show. Be sure to follow us on all social media at What's Choppin' Pod. It's Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And also, be sure to follow the Big Banter Sports on all social media. I believe the username is Big Banter Sports everywhere. This podcast is a part of the Big Banter Sports Network. Make sure to bring you the best Big Ten content for football and basketball, so be sure to stay tuned. There's a lot of good stuff coming. We've also launched our website. It's at bigbantersports.com. So if you're looking for content from the other podcasts in the Big Ten, the Big Banter Sports Network, or we're starting up our blog as well. If you want to read some stuff from there, definitely go check out the website. It's definitely has a lot of good information, and it's going to be popping soon as football season is coming back. So today's going to be a very special episode. We do have a guest, so it's not just me talking to you guys as today. And today we have a very special guest to the show. We are welcoming Brian Fonseca, the beat writer for Rutgers Athletics, also a co-host of the Rutgers Rant podcast. Be sure to check that one out too. If you are a Rutgers fan and you somehow found this podcast but not the Rutgers Rant, first, thank you, and second, I'm not sure what you're doing, but anyways, Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for the very nice introduction, and thank you for the plug of the Rutgers rant.
Yeah, happy to do it. A lot of good information there. So, the first thing I like to ask to pretty much anyone I interview when I'm talking about Rutgers is, how did you get your start? Covering Rutgers sports, because sports media is such a diverse, medium that everyone has a different story.
Sure. So I went to Rutgers as a student. I graduated in 18. I enrolled in 2014, and I entered school hoping to become an accountant. I think that's what my parents wanted, and that's what I thought I wanted. And then I failed pre-calc or calc or whatever I took, and I thought this wasn't for me. So I always liked. I read the sports section every day growing up, like a lot of people, and I figured it was something I wanted to try, and I had a lot of support from my parents. So I enrolled in Sky, and truthfully, I did not know much about Rutgers football or basketball when I started watching. I didn't know much about football, period. Frankly, it took me a lot of watching a lot of film and watching a lot of football to kind of grasp where I'm at now. But yeah, I just started covering them for the Targum, and I worked my way up from a staff writer to, associate sports editor to sports editor. And then I bounced around between a bunch of the recruiting sites. I worked for Rivals, and then I worked for 247. I worked for Aaron Brightman on the Banks when he was still with SB Nation. I interned at Newsday. I did a bunch of different things, and then I kind of got in at NJ.com through Sarge, who was a longtime Rutgers beat writer for the Record, for the Home News Tribune, and for NJ.com. And one thing led to another. I met the sports editor, did a couple interviews, got a job doing affiliated links, which is just kind of a very entry level make us money job. And I showed enough, I guess, to get the spot on the Rutgers beat when things opened up. So that's how I ended up where I am here, and that's why I will be covering the Scarlet Knights this season for NJ.com for the third season, second season as the full time beat writer. It's my second season.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. Pre-calc at Rutgers is not easy. I struggled my way through that too. But I
I'm much
guess
of a math guy
next,
myself, so
yeah, exactly. Well, especially working in sports, that's you gotta know
right,
some math. But
right.
um, so I guess what would you say is your favorite memory from covering Rutgers, either as a student or as a reporter as you are now? And that can be either football or non-football.
Sure. I think the thing that stands out to me is much like what probably stands out for most fans is the Ron Harper Jr. shot to beat Purdue. Just the insanity of that night. The game is going back and forth, and that's always tough to write up. A live gamer when that's happening, and the shot hits. I filmed the shot, so I was trying to upload the video on Twitter, and the internet was down. I couldn't post my story at the gun. I'm freaking out because I've never covered a game where a team upsets the number one team in the country. So there's a lot going on. And but I always remember it, and then you're talking to Ron afterwards, and he's kind of just jumping around to everywhere, talking to Scott Van Pelt and talking to us, and it felt like I don't want to say it felt like a seminal moment because the program was rising at that point already, but it really did feel like something's happening here, like something. And this was the same year that they lost to Lafayette, so I think a lot of people, including myself, were starting to think, what's going on this season? Is this a season that's kind of going in the wrong direction? And I think that really, everything wasn't roses after that. They did have they had a struggle in January, and then they had to pull out that miracle run in February where they beat four ranked teams in a row. I think that whole season, that up and down of that entire season was really memorable to me. But I think the Ron Harper shot obviously is a pretty. I don't know if I'll ever cover anything as nuts as that for the rest of my career. So
Yeah, I was at that game too. It really was crazy. There was a time when I was thinking like, all right, I think it was late in the first half when Ron Harper Jr. hit a 4-point play from like 2 feet behind the 3-point line. I was thinking, all right, yeah, we're winning this.
right. I think, but even when Travion Williams hits the two just before Ron's three half court shot, I almost put my phone down because I thought, this is. I mean, they're not going to come back from this, right? They're not going to hit that shot, and then lo and behold, I mean, it was. I off the top of my head, I think it was the biggest shot in Rutgers sports history, but that is very hyperbolic. So I'm leaving myself some room here too. I mean, I guess you can argue Jeremy Ito's field goal. You can argue there's probably a big shot in the NCAA tournament run to the Final Four in '76. But off the top of my head, it's got to be, if not the biggest, maybe the most iconic. I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I wish I had the foresight of you. I after Trevion Williams put that shot in, I actually did stop recording and didn't get the final shot, but I stormed the court anyway, so it was all good in the end.
There you go.
So next up, I guess with football underway, let's just cut to the chase. How are you feeling about this year's upcoming team for Rutgers football?
So I think it's a tough spot because Shiano's in his fourth year back, and fourth year is, I don't want to say make or break, but it's a year that you got to kind of start showing something. And I think the fan base feels that way. I think a lot of people, outsiders observing the program, feel that way. Obviously, his first year was impacted by COVID, and he was rebuilding a program that was really in the depths after the Ash era and the Flood era. But at his a lot of his the team is mostly recruited by him. His defense is very, very strong. So he's done a great job on that side of the ball. The offense is what it's been for the past decade or so, just really struggling is a nice way to put it. It's one of the worst. It's been one of the worst offenses in college football, even before Greg came back. And they were decent that first season and even in 2021 for a bit. But I think globally, people want to see Rutgers make a bowl game, win 6 games. They haven't had a winning season since 2014. They haven't made a bowl game the traditional way since that season. It's been a decade. And I think people, at the very least, would like to see the team contend for a bowl game, be in contention, have 5 wins entering November, and where you're at a point where you only need to win one game and really only need one bounce of the ball going the right way. But I think that's true of the entire season. I think for Rutgers to get to 6 wins, pretty much everything has to go their way. And Alec, as covering, being around the program, being around this athletic department, that rarely happens at Rutgers. It just is what it is. I don't know if it's bad luck. I don't know what it is. Things rarely seem to go perfectly aside from 2006, 1976, and those years that everyone remembers. So Rutgers would have to win all its toss-up games, essentially. It would have to beat Northwestern in the season opener, would have to beat Temple, would have to beat Virginia Tech, would have to beat Indiana, Wagner, and then one of the two between Maryland and Michigan State. Because while the program, I think we could all agree, is probably better than it's been, in quite some time, I'm not sure it's ready to pull off the Michigan, the Ohio State, the Penn State upset quite yet, although they've been close a couple of times with Michigan. So how I feel about the program, I think this is the year that they have to show something. They have to show us something. They have to, you talk about progress and you talk about developing the program, which is all well and good. Those are important steps towards becoming a competitive program. But at some point, you have to be competitive. So and even if you don't make a bowl game, if you don't contend for a bowl game, I think another big step would be avoiding blowout losses that have been happening for a decade. Don't lose 59-0 to Ohio State, lose, 37-21 or some have you, just be in the game in the fourth quarter, things of that nature. I think any of those three would be a positive step forward for this program. But obviously the ultimate goal is to make a bowl game. It's possible. I would say it's unlikely.
Yeah, and you mentioned the toss-up games, and I think you and I both agree that Michigan State and Maryland, those two games will definitely be, I guess, the flipping point to whether or not Rutgers makes a bowl game. Which of those two games do you think Rutgers has a better shot to win?
Good question. I think they have to go 1-1 in those games to make a bowl game. If you go 0-2, I just don't. And again, you'd have to win the other 5 flip games that come before it. So, I mean, I guess Iowa is a flip game, but at Kinnick Stadium, it's sold out. I'm not sure. To answer your question, I don't know. I would say Michigan State lost its starting quarterback to the portal, Peyton Thorne, who's going to start at Auburn. That's a big blow. And they lost their best wide receiver, who I can't remember where he transferred now, but he also left in the offseason. Um, Big blows to the offense and big blows to a team that really took a step back last year. And I don't think they've done much to restock through the portal this offseason. I think Mel Tucker's in a spot where he had that huge year in 21 with that he hit the jackpot with that running back whose name I can't remember right now. Do you remember who the running back was in
Yeah, I
21?
do because he's on my team now, Kenny Walker for the Seahawks.
Kenny Walker. There you go. So Mel Tucker's in a spot too where he has to prove did he just hit the jackpot with Kenny Walker and a bunch of great transfers and have a perfect storm in 21, or is he was last year the anomaly? So I think that'll go a long way. But I think I err towards the sides of it of 22 being more of what Michigan State is under Tucker than 21. So I would say that I Maryland has had Rutgers number for years now. They're just always seem to be more athletic. They always seem to um, I don't know. They control games against Rutgers. They dominated them last year. And they have Tagovailoa back. He's back for his senior season. So they don't have Raheem Jarrett. That was a big loss. He was a pretty strong wide receiver. But I I would lean towards Michigan State being the more winnable game, particularly because they're playing them at home. But I think either of them are winnable. Rutgers just has to go out and win one of them, obviously.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Talia Tagovailoa being back from Maryland. It feels like whenever Rutgers does beat Maryland, they're always on like their fourth string quarterback or something. I mean, if you go back to 2020, Tagovailoa was hurt. If you go back to way back to 2017, it was like Max Bortenschlager. He was their fourth string quarterback. So it's yeah, I definitely agree that Michigan State's going to be that winnable game, and they showed it last year too. As you know, granted it was a touchdown in the last minute, but they pulled it to within one score late in the fourth quarter of that game. And that was without Sam Brown, who had gotten injured a couple weeks before. Kyle Monangai had a career game, and Gavin Wimsatt really looked like a good Big Ten quarterback in that game.
That was a weird game, and it was the flip side of the norm where the offense really seemed to click. That was probably their best offensive game against the Big Ten team last year, and the defense just wasn't able to get it going and make any stops. So, yeah, I agree. I think it's always tough to base what's going to happen next year off of what happened last year. Just 1-to-1, these teams change a lot. But yeah, I think Rutgers they beat Michigan State in 2020. I think I would not be surprised if Rutgers beat Michigan State this year.
So looking back on the Scarlet Knights themselves, what would you say which position is going to be the most important on offense and on defense?
Important. So offense, the two. I'll give you two because I can't decide between the two. I think offensive line is massively critical for the run game and the pass game. Obviously, Rutgers has not had, even a middle of the pack offensive line in the Big Ten and maybe since 2014, 2015. And that's very important to help out Isaiah Pacheco, Sam Brown, and Gavin Wimsatt. I think Gavin Wimsatt it was the other position quarterback. I think let's start with Gavin Wimsatt. Gavin Wimsatt has to show something this year. I know he's a sophomore, but the way college football is now, there was a report from 247 Sports where something like 62% of projected starters in college football are transfers. Things are moving quickly now. You don't have until your senior year to develop into a high quality starter. I don't think this. I'm not trying to say that Gavin has to become a Heisman Trophy contender to keep his job and maintain solidify himself as the Rutgers quarterback. But I think if he has another year where, like last year, he struggles, I'm not sure if you can justify leaning on him and totally standing by him as your starting quarterback, right? I think he has to show a step forward and, take that 44 completion percentage and make it 54, 55, throw some touchdowns, throw less interceptions, look more comfortable, fit into the offense, look like a Big Ten quarterback, I guess is my point here. And to do that, he needs help from his offensive line, which, they bring back some experience from last year. They bring back some starters. Still some question marks on the right side of the line as far as the battles that are happening. Still some question marks about depth. I will believe any progress I see if I see it in games. It's always tough to tell in practice, and it's always worth noting that the defensive line Rutgers has is probably their deepest, best unit on the roster. So I don't know where the offensive line stands. Truthfully, I just think they need to be huge because what Sam Brown did last year was special, not because of not only because of how good he is, but because he did it with the offensive line he had. He turned some much like Isaiah Pacheco, he turned our colleague Bobby Darren at 247 Sports likes to say this, and I think it's very true that Isaiah Pacheco had some of the most impressive 2 or 3 yard runs he's ever seen, just because he had to fight for his life every time he touched the ball. Sam Brown was kind of similar last year in that if you watch the Indiana game, some of his runs were just tremendous. A lot of his yards were after contact, and he's just able to overcome some difficulties and lack of space. So if the offensive line takes a step forward and gives him even more spacing to run into, I think he's in for a special year. But those are the two positions I would say: quarterback and offensive line. If they could both take a step forward, I think Rutgers has a chance of not being one of the 10 worst offenses in college football as they've been for. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think a majority of the last decade. So um, I'll point to those two.
And so obviously the one player at quarterback is going to be Gavin Wimsatt. That is going to be the X factor for that position. How about for the offensive line? Is there an X factor piece that can help swing the performance of the position?
I can't think of one. I just think that whatever five they pick, it sounds like Greg, based on his first press conference of the training camp, wants to have a solid group of 5 guys. If he could find those 5 guys, and if they can become, if they could play well regularly, I think that would be key. But I don't think there's one spot on the line that's crucial. I think they all 5 of them have to play very well.
And then how about on the defensive side? Now you mentioned that the defensive line is probably the strongest unit on the entire team. Would you say that's the most important unit on the defensive side?
I would think so. I think that for them to be a dominant defense, that's the position that really has to live up to its billing and play like an elite defensive line, which I think they can be. You got Aaron Lewis and Wesley Bailey at defensive end, who I think could both have very big years. You bring back a lot of experience on defensive tackle, Mina Hanatu, Keontae Hamilton. You bring Isaiah Aiton from Ole Miss, who's a very big, large man. I think you can attest to that, having seen him in the flesh after practice.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Right. So I think they bring a lot there, and they have a lot of young, Kenny Fletcher is a guy who got some run last year. I think he has a chance of having a breakout season. So if you can become a team that pressures opposing quarterbacks, gets them on the ground, gets some sacks, pushes opposing offenses back and into negative yardage situations, I think that would be a long way into turning Rutgers into a very formidable defensive side. I think obviously the rest of the defense is important. Linebacker is important. They got a lot more depth than last year. The back end is important. They're replacing a couple guys at safety in Avery Young and Christian Izzian. But I think they're pretty set on the defensive end. They bring back a lot of talent, a lot of experience, and they're working with Joe Harris-Simiak for a second season. Which, if last year was his first year and they did pretty well for most of the year, I'm pretty excited to see how good they can be under him in his second year.
Yeah, that unit should hopefully carry the team and hopefully lead to some kind of top 30 ranking in the country in most defensive stats if they want to have success this season. So as training camp has gone on, what you can say, because we know that a lot of times you can't really report much from training camp. What have been some interesting position battles that either you've seen or you've heard so far as we head into the season?
Yeah, like you said, we're a bit limited in what we can share on per the media policy at Rutgers. I would say, one that Greg brought up after the first scrimmage that I think is pretty important. The two battles on the right side of the offensive line at right guard and right tackle. It sounds like Mike Chafani and who's the other? Kobe Asamoah are going at it at guard, and then right tackle is Tyler Needham and Kamar Missouri. Whoever wins those battles needs to become a consistent and play well with the rest of the line. It sounds like the other side of the line is pretty set between Holland Pierce, Curtis Dunlap, and Ireland Brown. If those other two positions could solidify and that unit could become consistent, somewhat consistent, help Gavin Wimsatt not be on the ground very much and help create some space for Sam Brown. Those are the two position battles, I think. And then I guess wide receiver, just in general, they lost their 3 most productive receivers from last year. There's a lot of snaps to be had. There's a lot of players vying for them. Seeing how that shakes out will be pretty interesting. So I think those 2 spots are, and then safety, as I said, but it seems like that's not really much of a battle. So, but those 2 spots that I mentioned are probably the most intriguing battles, especially now that there's no quarterback battle in training camp.
Yeah, as Wimsatt was named the starter even before training camp, which you don't see too often. But the not only the position, not only the players at the positions on the offense has changed. There's been a complete overhaul, of the coaching staff as well, as they brought in new offense coordinator Kirk Shiraka. new wide receivers coach, new offensive line coach, and Dave Brock and Pat Flaherty. So, what have you seen from some of these new offensive coaches and how they're working with the team so far?
Dave Brock is very intense. He's a very intense guy. That's just the way he is. He's very old school. We'll get, he's very intense. I will say that. I cannot, not even if I could, I wouldn't be able to say it, the major changes I've seen from the offense, but it's hard to glean much even in these training camp settings. Uh, I can't imagine there will be enormous wholesale changes just because it's hard to overhaul an entire offense. I don't know what will come. I will say that while you change the coaching staff, and I'm sure that that will bring changes, I don't know how much progress the coaching staff alone can bring to an offense because at the end of the day, they're still working with a majority of the same players outside of wide receiver. There wasn't many big gets out of the portal aside from wide receiver from Jaquay Jackson, Nassim Brantley. I mean, you had Sean Bowman at tight end, but a lot of the players are players from last year. So can the coaching staff take these players to the next level in an offseason? It's certainly possible. But I think it's up to the players making that improvement and helping the offense more than it on the coaches. The coaches can help, obviously. And the two coaches you mentioned, offensive line, Pat Flaherty, and wide receiver, Dave Brock, these are developmental guys. These aren't guys that are going to go out into the recruiting trail and get a bunch of elite players. They're going to take players that Rutgers gets and develop them into NFL caliber players. As Greg Shannon likes to talk about, a developmental program and building the pipeline. Building that pipeline is developing your players, and those two guys are very, very good at doing that. But I don't know if we'll be able to see an immediate improvement on the players that are there. I don't know how much of improvement is fair to expect in one offseason. But that's what I'll say. That's kind of the test of their first season is how much growth have they been able to give these players, and for Kirk Shiraka, how has he been able to configure this offense to put these players in the best position to show whatever improvement they made in the offseason.
Yeah, and that's something that Shiano's really talked about. Like you said, that developmental program. They're here to, develop guys all 4 or 5 years or however many years they're here. So what would you say is an underrated player on offense and on defense that you think could surprise people that people maybe aren't thinking of right now?
These questions are always tough. And frankly, I think that's probably an off-limits question as far as because if I did have an underrated surprise player, I don't think I'd be able to reveal it. But just for transparency, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody. But that's generally because I'm not good at these kinds of questions.
That's all right. So yeah, the offense and the defense, they're looking to be, at least Big Ten level for the offense, especially. The defense is already pretty Big Ten level, but looking into the future, how is recruiting looking, especially for the classes of 2024 and 2025 and beyond?
24 class is highly ranked, I believe top 30 on the 247 Sports Composite. So there's progress there. I think they had a pretty big summer in getting a lot of guys, into the program. They have a quarterback of the future in AJ Surace in the class, which is always important to kind of have that position locked up. They got Gabe Winovich from Michigan, who is enrolling at Notre Dame High School in South Jersey to play alongside Surace for his senior season. That's pretty positive to help those two kind of build chemistry, especially if they're going to be the playmakers of the future of the offense. And a lot of defensive talent. Greg Shannon loves his defensive backs, love him some defensive talent, and they got plenty of it in this class. So the 24 class as it stands looks pretty solid. And I think a lot of recruiting will also happen through the portal just because of the way college football is nowadays. The December, January period will be very important in them bolstering that side of the ball. I think that's where, I think Greg Shannon was still really primarily focused on high school recruiting, as you could tell with the 20-something commits he has in this class. I think he will always be looking in the portal to kind of fill in holes on the roster at whatever positions need, experienced player.
Yeah, and you mentioned the big summer. One of the guys they got, Kaj Sanders at a Bergen Catholic, almost a rarity at this point for Rutgers to get a New Jersey guy from one of those top schools. How important do you think it is, not only landing Sanders, but keeping up the momentum of recruiting in New Jersey?
I think it's been proven over some time that these parochial schools are not sending kids in droves to Rutgers, right? This isn't like Ohio where all the best players in Ohio want to play for Ohio State or Michigan or Texas or Florida. Rutgers is a little different. And Greg obviously made headway in those schools in his first time around. It seems like he's doing well in reversing that trend. Not reversing that trend. I'm sorry, restarting that trend again. As you mentioned, with getting college standards, it's a big get, but I don't think that's their entire focus. I don't think they're trying to penetrate into the parochial schools and make that a pipeline. I think Greg even talked about this at Big Ten Media Day. They're really expanding their map, going into North Carolina. They're going into Michigan. They went into Wisconsin for a kid. They went into they're building a pipeline in Ohio. They're going back to Florida. I think Florida might have the most kids in this class. If not Florida, then it's New Jersey, but Florida might be up there. I think there's something like 7 commits from Florida in this class. New York obviously has been a very big area. They got KJ Duff from St. Anthony's, who's a very big get for them. Beat out some big schools for him. So I think their focus is not, well, it would be nice to, get all these 5-star, 4-star kids from the parochial schools. I think they're being pragmatic and really widening the net and finding that there's a lot of good football being played all over the country. And with this Big Ten footprint ever expanding, at this point, they might pick up Hawaii in 5 years the way they're expanding. I think they will look for any opportunities they can, get into the Midwest, stay focused on Florida, expand their southern footprint. And look, if that means that it would bring them more success, and with more success will bring more interest from the parochials, I'm sure they would be happy to, pound those schools hard. But for now, it seems like they're really not drilling or putting all their focus on one area. They're kind of expanding their horizons and getting whatever football players, as Greg Schiano likes to say, want to be at Rutgers. I think that's the most important thing for him.
Definitely. And that's another thing that he's really talked about a lot ever since the spring is expanding his quote unquote state of Rutgers, whether that's, in New Jersey or elsewhere. Like you said, that 24 class is very diverse as to where, these players are coming from. So I guess a follow up to that, like you said, with the conference expansion, obviously USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington will be joining the Big Ten in 2024. Do you see them, expanding their recruiting, I guess, to use Greg Schiano's words, his state of Rutgers into those, all the way out into the Western states?
I would be surprised. It's a lot to go out there, and there's a lot of talent in California, and there's some talent in the Pacific Northwest, but it's very far to travel to recruit. Like when they recruit Georgia and North Carolina, there are multiple nonstop flights from Newark to Atlanta every day, right? It's pretty convenient to make a trip down there and come back the same day. Even going to California as a whole, not a week, but almost of travel, just because you have to take a day to go there, a day to go back. And I think it would take a really special player to warrant that kind of effort. And if a player is that special, I think there's a lot of local schools also going after him. So I would be surprised. I just don't know if it's worth the effort to go that far. I think the Midwest and South are pretty big enough footprint, but I could be wrong. But I don't think they're really starting to build a base in the West just yet.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you there. Now, looking more towards the present, some of, the 2022 recruiting class was seen as a pretty strong one. The 2023 class was a bit of a step back. How do you see some of those players as they're, maturing up through their college years, as the 22 class is entering their sophomore year and the 23 class is obviously coming in for the first time? How do you see some of those players impacting, maybe not this year, but in the near future?
Well, you have to hope that a lot of the young offensive linemen they got develop. Offensive line recruiting is a crapshoot sometimes, right? Unless you're getting these tailor-made, ready-made 5-star offensive linemen who could start as freshmen, like Ohio State and Michigan's and Alabama's and Georgia's of the world are getting. You're kind of banking on potential in these kids. And look, Dominic Rivera, for example, is a kid I believe in the 23 class. We watched him walk off the practice field yesterday, and I was shocked at how big he looks. He looked like a Big Ten lineman, but will that size translate into talent and an ability to play offensive line? Who knows? I mean, Holland Pierce was a kid that looked like a Big Ten offensive lineman when he walked on, but you never really knew if he would be able to play it until he shed the weight and built up his body. But I think that my point with that being that you have to hope that those young offensive linemen, you nail a few of them and they can become stalwarts on the line moving forward. And then you have to hope that all the other talent, the position players, kind of are able to fill in the role. I can't think of any specific names right now that jump out. I mean, Sam Brown obviously was the star of the 22 class, and he really showed that he could be a star at Rutgers last year. Then I certainly think there are players in that group that can have a similar breakout year this year, but I think we should wait and see for the first 3 games and see if anybody pops out.
Definitely, definitely. So I guess for this, moving back to this season, what is a hot take that you have for the team this season? It can be a game or a stat or anything like that.
I'm still formulating my takes, my season prediction. Um, I think I think they'll win the first game pretty easily. I think I just think Northwestern was bad last year. They bolstered themselves a bit in the portal, but nothing. It's not like they had a roster overhaul. They're in a complete mess. They're a complete chaos, and I'm not sure if their head coach is ready to kind of put all this together. He's a first year. It's his first time in Power Five football, period, and he's dealing with one of the biggest scandals, in recent Big Ten history, right? So, I know there are people that are worried about that first game just because the first game is always tough. It's a Big Ten opponent. Northwestern will have the us against the world mentality. I just don't think they have the horses, and while Rutgers may not have many horses either, I just think that everything points to a pretty comfortable Rutgers win, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. I just don't see Northwestern putting up much of a fight. It's not much of a hot take, so sorry, but I just that's what came to mind first.
And some people might consider that a hot take at this point, but yeah, that I mean, I guess that can segue into the next question. How important is it to win that first game against Northwestern to set up the rest of the season?
I think it's monumental. I think if you lose that game, a bowl game is probably not happening, just because it's one of those games, one of those toss up games, right? And I think they showed last year. You win that first game against Boston College, you get some momentum, and you beat Temple, you beat Wagner, you start off 3-0, and while the season eventually did fall off the rails, there was a nugget of juice there that really there was an opportunity. And I think similarly, if Rutgers can start off 3-0 this year and go into the big house, um, I mean, it'll be a tough game, obviously, and Jim Harbaugh will be on the sidelines. But as we've mentioned, they've come close to upsetting Michigan twice in the last 3 years, which, I mean, that must play some form of psychological boost for Rutgers, knowing that we came so close and we've proven that we can almost do it. Are we going to be able to do it now? I think that's pretty easy psychological fodder for the coaching staff. Um, but if you lose that Northwestern game, the whatever juices there is entering the season is pretty much squeezed out, and they're going to have to, um, win the rest of their winnable games. That Maryland Michigan State split ends up having to be 2-0 to make a bowl game, and yeah, I think it's important just to keep momentum, keep the air in the balloon, and help create a base to which you build the season up from. Um, and losing, frankly, would be pretty bad looking nationally because people that have been following college football casually in the offseason have seen Northwestern look like an absolute train wreck. And the casual observers think of Rutgers the way they think of Rutgers, right? It's Rutgers, right? So I just think it would be another Rutgers would become an easy target of the casual college football fan. And that's not what you want if you're Rutgers, obviously, right? So you're trying to build the program, try to build momentum, try to build respect. The last thing you want to do is become the laughing stock of the first week of the season on a game where you're the only show in town. You're the only game on at noon on Sunday on Labor Day weekend. It's a big spot. You win that game, you feel good. You have some momentum. You had some good press. You lose that game, it's gonna be a tough one to bounce back in a week's time against Temple.
Yeah, you don't want to say the season's over after one game, but effectively, if they lose that game, the season could be over. So I guess going off of that, do you have your, I guess, unofficial official record prediction for the season yet?
So I'm teetering between. I don't think I'll get to 6-6. I just cannot envision a world where everything goes right. It's too big of a leap for me. I don't think it's impossible. I really don't. I just I personally cannot see it happening. I'm teetering between 4-8 and 5-7. And I think 5-7 would be, depending on how it happens, could be a pretty good year for Rutgers, and 4-8, depending on how it happens, could be a disappointment. I will I am leaning towards 5-7. I reserve the right to change my mind by the time our season predictions come out the week of the first game. I'm leaning that way. I just think the defense creates such a strong base for this team. I think that the offense cannot be much worse than last year. And I believe Kirk Shiraka, in conjunction with Gavin Wimsett being a year older and more experienced and healthier, can get something going there. So I call me optimistic. I think there is a chance for a 5-7 year. And if the Big Ten, when they reconfigure their schedule for 24, doesn't screw Rutgers again and gives them a bit of a favorable-ish schedule, a manageable schedule, I should say, 23, a 5-7 year could kind of trampoline them, catapult them into, a potential breakout year in 24. So that's where I stand right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, if you say, 5-7 is optimistic, I've been predicting 6-6, so I guess I'm extra optimistic. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yes,
you mentioned that 2024 schedule that Rutgers kind of got screwed over. I mean, it's the entire Big Ten East minus Indiana, and you plug in UCLA. So that's yeah, the conference was not too kind, but obviously they're gonna have to, reconfigure that. Um, so I guess in terms of, football questions, that's all I have. But thankfully, since this is not the Rutgers rant, we don't have questions from the audience, so you're not bound to that like you are usually.
thank God.
But
I'm
but
joking. I'm joking.
but just in case Steve Blee's watching this, um, so since you said you went to Rutgers and now you're still covering the team. What's your go-to spot? If you need to get something in downtown New Brunswick, get something to eat. What's your go-to spot?
So I live in downtown New Brunswick. So I eat a lot around here. So when I was in school, I went to Taqueria maybe 3 to 4 times a week. I love that place. I still do. I don't go as often as I used to, but I love that place. Um, what's it called? Hansel and Griddle's always a you can't go wrong there. There's so many options. That's so many good stuff. When I was at the Targum, we did March Munchies where we had people vote on the best restaurant in New Brunswick, and Hansel and Griddle won. And I can't say I was too upset about that choice. What else? I ate a lot of pizza in downtown New Brunswick. I got uh, Douglas Pizza, and I have Filippo's, a block from my apartment in either direction. So I eat a lot there. I like eating bagel nosh for breakfast here in downtown New Brunswick. There's a lot of good stuff. Tavern George. What else? There's a lot of great food. But if I had to pick one spot that I can only go to, stuff your face, obviously. If there's one spot I can only go to for the rest of my life in New Brunswick, it'd be Taqueria. I think it's the greatest Mexican food on earth. And I've never been to Mexico, but I can't imagine there's too much better food down there. So
I've only been to Taqueria once, but it was pretty good. That's pretty high praise, I gotta say.
yeah, it's a
And
little
now,
hyperbolic, but I'm a hyperbolic kind of guy. So
yeah. So I only got one more question here, but so for a backstory, for I believe it was for NJ Advanced Media, you spent some time with former Rutgers basketball player Geo Baker in his basketball training. I believe it's GB Go Beyond now. You spent a day there. So my question is, have you been keeping up with any training or practice? How's your game looking now?
I have not touched the basketball since, I think, to be honest. I have a basketball in my closet. I haven't taken it out. I'm more of a soccer guy, as people who follow the rant know. I play soccer 3 times a week. I haven't gotten any better playing 3 times a week, but I do play 3 times a week. So if I were to take another lesson with Gio tomorrow, I think he would be very disappointed in the progress I have not made. But it would be fun for everyone because I get to shoot some hoops and Gio gets to laugh at me for a little bit. So I think it's a pretty fair, equal trade.
Yeah, that was definitely very entertaining. If people watching or listening have not seen it, I definitely check that out. It was very entertaining, I gotta say. But yeah, Brian, thank you so much for giving some of your time to come on the show today. You gave some great insight, and if any opposing fans were watching, you know where to go in New Brunswick if you want to get somewhere to eat if you're coming to town.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Alec. I appreciate it. Good luck with this project. I think it's you really, really care about Rutgers sports, so I think you're going to do a great job with it. And I'm honored that I am one of the first guests on the show. Right, not the first, but one of.
I believe you are the first, actually.
Well, look at that. Look at that. Starting high. There you go.
But
I
yeah, we'll
like it.
definitely we'll definitely have some more guests in the near future, actually. But yeah, Brian, thank you again for coming on. This has been episode 3 of the What's Choppin' podcast. Again, be sure to follow on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube at What's Choppin' Pod, and we'll see you next time.